The Algerian church is welcome to this party, and we are really glad you're here. And I hope that you guys, whatever country you came from, that you will take time to get to know the people that you're having coffee with. There are just amazing people coming from countries all around the world, and it's only for a few days, but it's very special, you know. And this is your time. The Lord wants to teach you truths through people that you didn't expect that, you know? Did you expect this morning to hear a testimony from a brother from Algeria, you know? So that's just wonderful. But you might sit at a coffee table and you see a Finnish person or somebody from Asia or somebody from Africa, you know, or somebody from England who hasn't lived in England for 20 years. Hey, I want to ask you to turn your Bibles to Acts chapter 17. You know, the other night I was, we're going through the different cities, and when Paul was lowered out of Damascus, the world would be changed. And I often think about the idea of the perfume of Mary. There was a crowd outside the house of Lazarus, and that perfume was so potent, it was able to go under the cracks of the doors. And the crowd outside, I'm sure it must have smelled the scent of the offering. And the door or the closure does not have the ability to stop the scent and the perfume. And the doors of cultures, religions, and philosophies of color do not have the ability to stop the perfume of Christ, the perfume of the gospel, from reaching North Korea, from reaching Algeria, from reaching what was the Soviet Union, from reaching Pakistan, or reaching Afghanistan, or Tajikistan, or Malaysia. That's my Bible. So I'm preaching, and they're like, please, can you read the Bible?
Turn this receipt in.
Okay. Now my page is torn, and I'm going to have to struggle to read this. It's okay. The Lord will forgive me. But the idea, for sure, of the gospel being able to penetrate any culture, any place, any person, even someone who thinks that they are Christian and they don't know the truth. And so Paul left Damascus and began a life calling of taking the gospel to the Gentiles. Of course, he did go continue to preach to the Jews. But in the context of Acts chapter 17, we really see the first major explosion of the splash of the gospel hitting the really what from the Jewish perspective would be the pagan world, and how the message, which was until then only for Jews, going all over the place and spreading like wildfire. Let's turn in Acts chapter 17, verse 16. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace by day and night, with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to dispute with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." And they said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. You know, what are you preaching on? The good news is what Paul preached on, the good news of Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to meet to a meeting of the Areopagus. And I'll show you a picture in a second of the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is and what you're presenting. You're bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we want to know what they mean." And all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening about the latest ideas. Paul stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I see in everywhere you're religious. For as I walked around and observed the objects of worship, I even found an altar to the inscription to the unknown God. Now, to what you worship as something unknown, I am going to proclaim to you, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and he does not dwell in temples built by man. He is not served by human hands, and as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. From one man he has made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he determined the times set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For God has set a day where he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to men by raising him from the dead. When they heard about this resurrection from the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, "We want to hear you again on this subject." And at that, Paul left the council, and a few men became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionymus. How do you say it? Okay, and members of the Areopagus and a woman named Damaris, I think I said that right, and a number of others. This is a great passage. I mean, really, it's like the perfect passage to talk about this morning. Imagine, Europe has never been reached. And this man who was a true terrorist, a murderer, a person who wanted to destroy the church, has met with God. He's seen God, and his whole life has changed. And he is now being called to take the gospel to the Western world, basically. And I think that he, in verse 16, it says he becomes full of anxiety. He's greatly distressed. I remember one day when I was walking in Damascus. It was maybe 2001, and I was walking through the streets, and I was just thinking, there is no witness here. I mean, I found it so overwhelming. There are like over 20 million people living there. And in very, very few people who are sharing the gospel. And I was thinking, how in the world will people, or will these men get to know about Jesus Christ? And the anxiety in him, the distress of the situation is what the Lord uses. And I think that the idea of the pearl and the oyster, it begins with a grain of sand, that there's sense of something is wrong, and the Lord often plants that, and if you just look at the world today, you just look at some of the world's issues, you can look at it, and it causes men to step up. 1 in 7 of the world today live in a slum. 1 in 7. I don't know if you know that. Can you imagine 1 in 7 of the crowd here? 1 in 7 of the world lives in a slum. 15% of the world's undernourished. 49% of the world today earn less than $2. 13% of the world today do not drink clean water. You know, I've got a bottle of water here. You don't think anything of not drinking clean water, but 13% of the world today does not drink clean water. 23% of the world has no shelter. So almost a quarter of the world's population tonight will not sleep in a place that they can call home. 93% of the world has never gone to college. 17% of the world cannot read. And, you know, so as we start engaging and looking at the places you go to, you will start to have agitations and just saying, this is wrong. There are girls selling themselves in the streets here. And some of you are just going to be just torn by this. There's refugees, there are poor, there are issues going on, and the Lord puts a burden on our life. And look, today the idea is about how to bring what God has done to us and the message that's within us into context to a person of another thought, another way, another belief. If I went to my Algerian brother here and I said, look, England is a much better football team than the Algerian football team. He's just going to laugh at me. He's like, Gary, your team's rubbish. But I'm like, no, I'm going to convince him, and I'm going to shake him. And he might say, actually, you're just stupid. you're just stupid. And the thing is, what does it mean to bring what is within me to a person in another city, another culture, another worldview, another way of thinking? And Paul is standing up. Paul is a Jew. Paul is come from Asia. He's come to Europe, and he stands up. And you got to understand, Athens is the center of learning. Athens is the thinking man's. They are very proud that this is the place where all the great philosophers came from. Rome is the empire, but Greeks are the intelligent ones. And so he's actually going through the streets. He starts to reason. He starts to share his faith in the marketplace. And he meets this group of philosophers. And then they kind of discuss with him. They argue with him. But they invite him to the Areopagus, or the Mars Hill. And you got that picture, Bryce? So this is Mars Hill. Have any of you guys been to Athens? Some of you guys? Yeah. All right. And, the amazing thing, it hasn't changed at all. You can actually really see how it was for Paul, because it's exactly the same. And on here, in the mornings, the philosophers and thinkers would sit. And you have that other picture with the Parthenon in the background? Right. And so Paul is preaching there, and he turns and he says, hey, by the way, the God, this unknown God, does not dwell in buildings made by man. He is preaching this context with this amazing building in the background, And I mean, it's like the Greeks think we've got it all. We know it. We've got all the gods. They're all packaged, and God hangs out in this building. And from the Areopagus, so imagine us, we're all like on this rock. Looks up and he says, God is not hanging out in that building. I tell you, you want to pick a fight? You want to upset people? I sat pretty much where, by the way, that cross isn't always there, but I sat on this rock, and 3 Afghanis came up to me not long ago, and I sat there and had an amazing conversation with them. If you go to Athens today, you will see there are, well, you won't know that, but there are over 1 million refugees. They're coming from many countries, and you can sit and just have brilliant conversations. And the conversation when this happened, I had a conversation with 3 Afghanis and shared Jesus. So wherever you go, you're going to meet in these countries now very interesting people. Anyway, Paul begins to preach. And, you know, of course, the idea of the place of learning, we could also talk about the pride of man, that in a sense, humanism, that we know it. We know it. And I don't know if you ever come up to people where people they just feel like they've got it down. You know, and Christians, we do that too. You know, we feel like we've got theology figured out. You know, we understand the Trinity. You know, we understand dispensationalism. We understand the Reformed theology. We understand eschatology, and we understand, you know what I mean? We kind of get to the point, and pride seeps in. And I think that these philosophers really thought they knew it. But Paul, he walked on the streets. He looked and learned. He memorized poetry. He memorized their poetry. He started studying about their gods. I mean, how many gods did he look at before he found the unknown God? It wasn't like he stood up and started preaching without preparation. So he walked around, he prepared himself, and then in verse 23, the word proclaim, which is the word declare, and which is the idea of the evangelion, the evangelist. The evangelion was, in the time of the Roman army, the one man who would walk ahead of the Roman army, and then he would come into a city, and he would declare, good news, the empire is here. Bow your knee or die. That is the role of the evangelion. And if you want to see the image of the evangelion, look at the movie Gladiator. Right at the beginning, the Roman army has moved into Germany. That didn't work out very well long term, but anyway. And then there's a man on a horse, and he rides up to these men, and he is the evangelion. He's the evangelist. His job is not to persuade. His job is to say, the kingdom is coming, and you need to bow your knee. And his head, they cut his head off, and he came racing back. You guys remember? Anybody a Gladiator movie fans here? I mean, I think it's just one of the best movies ever. It's all us guys like, yeah. And but the idea of the evangelion is the one who goes and proclaims what the future looks like, what the truth is, and he obviously says, hey, look, God does not dwell in buildings made by man. And in verse 28, then he quotes pagan poetry. The Bible has pagan poetry in it. It's poetry that belongs to men who worship many gods. And then the response to his proclamation is, some sneered. You know, people criticized him. And, you know, if you step out of the boat and follow God's will, people will criticize you. You've got to be ready for that. You've got to be ready for that. It can be lonely. It can be discouraging. If you are choosing in your soul to say, hey, Lord, I want to go long term and do this. I want to give my life to this. You are going to suffer. And I can only say that because in my own life, there is just, anybody around my life or anybody in mission, it can be discouraging. You can be criticized. You can feel lonely. You can feel like you fail a lot of the time. And it's much easier to not go, quite frankly. And I know that people say, oh, it's cool, and it's fun, and it's hip. And I would say, yeah, some of the time. But you might really, your life may be taken from you. Certainly, your wealth might be taken from you. And I mean, there are many things that people suffer. Sandra, yesterday morning, you know, she went and gave her whole life, and then she gets kicked out, you know. There are many stories of people who suffer for taking the gospel. And here, some sneered, and that's step one. Of course, Paul was stoned and probably left for dead. He was, in the end, killed for his faith. But verse 34, it says, a few followed Paul and believed. It's amazing, you know. He stood up, and he stood up in a kind of a place like this, a crowd like this, of the smartest philosophers of Greece. And he spoke the name of Jesus, and some believed. And why I like this is that the gospel is better than man's philosophy. It is better. The gospel is better than man's religions. The gospel is better than man's cultures. And okay, if you want me to have fun, and I like to do it, you know, gospel is better than Batman. The gospel is better than Spider-Man. You know, Spider-Man is not going to fly between buildings for you. Batman will not respond to the call for you. Tom Cruise is not going to come back in Mission Impossible 13 and save your life. I know it's like, you know, but I love to go to those movies. I do. I mean, I'm not kidding. But they're all superheroes and they're all fake. But the name of Jesus is real. And he is able to save you. And he is able to give you hope. And he is able to rescue you. He is able to deliver you. He is able to put his arms around you. He's able to accept you when I can't, when you've sinned and I struggle with forgiving you. He is able to hold you and give you hope and give you peace and give you joy. It is a better message. It is a better message. And I think, I still play soccer. I'm older. I still play soccer. I played soccer my whole life, right? And in Germany, I met my coach. We were really good friends. And he said, we were having a conversation. He goes, well, I just don't believe there's a God. I said, well, that's pretty gutsy of you to say that, because that means you have more faith than I do. And actually, you have more faith than most people in the world. Most people in the world believe there's a God. And he goes, well, it's not that. It's just I don't know who to believe. It's like, should I believe in Muhammad or Jesus or Buddha? You know, who should I believe in? And I said, that's the most ignorant thing you could say to me. All that means is that you've never bothered to take time to find out what the truth is. Now, I thought I'd lost my friendship with but it was said in love. It was said in a point where I'd earned his ear. And, you know, the result is he really opened up, and he read my book. It's in German. And he came up to me, and he said, I wept several times reading your book, reading your story. And actually, on the Tuesday after, I thought that he will never talk to me again. He came running up to me and he said, Gary, I went home and I told my wife, I told my children what you said. I've never heard this before. You know, now I don't believe in a polemic approach to the gospel. I don't believe criticizing, attacking. But sometimes, you know, there's a spiritual boldness where you go in and you say, you got it wrong. Actually, Jesus is the right way. And go there, some people will sneer. Context. Paul went to the philosophers. He went to the thinkers. He went to, of course, he went to the streets as well. He studied about the idols. He studied about the religion. He memorized poetry. He became a Greek. He was seen as a Greek. People looked at him. If you go to Greece today, people think of Paul as Greek. He was Greek, but he was not a Greek. He was a Jew, and he was from Asia. But he came into context so much. How do you do that? With food. If you don't like food, don't come to the Mediterranean. And Mediterranean people love food. And you know the truth is, it's better than the other food in the world. It is really good. If you go to Lebanon and you eat tabbouleh and fattoush and kufta, and you sit down with you know, if you sit in Algeria, there is no better food than to be in Algeria and eat couscous, and you eat it together, and stories are told. It is, food brings people together. And, you know, there's nothing worse. You go, no, I don't want to try that. I don't like that. If they bring out a sheep's head, you know, you suck the eye out. I'm just kidding. But if you go to the Bedouin, and they consider you the person of honor, you get to get a sheep's head. You're going to get a cultural shock. So there's food. There's also music. Has any of you learned how to dance like an Arab dances? It is the best. It's so much fun. It's better than breakdancing. Troy's breakdancing is so poor. Humor. You see, I'm using humor. I'm offending everybody. But humor and food and how do you laugh? How do you laugh with a person? And how do you cry with a person? You know, that's what it means to come into context and bring Jesus, bring your story in that context. Don't say, well, I've got distracted. It's the 4 spiritual laws today, and now I'm not against the 4 spiritual laws. I'm a big fan of it, right? But be in context. You look and you're like, oh, I see you have this God. I see this poetry to learn and love the culture that you're going to. That is what it means. Paul displayed this. He didn't go in and hold on to his